The Leinster Championship resumes again at the weekend. Galway have an away game against Laois. I suppose the big game of the round in Parnell Park between Dublin and Kilkenny, but plenty to play for in the remaining 2 rounds of fixtures.
Yeah, big time, Cian. I suppose just from a Laois perspective, really, like I was just looking at it there. Like if you look at their league campaign, right, we'll say they had a really good performance the first day out against Tipperary. 2 horrendous results then against Waterford and Kilkenny, and then like obviously they had they had targeted the Antrim game, their 4th game, which was a massive game because it was effectively going to decide who was going to stay out of the relegation final. Even though there was 1 round to play, and a draw would have done Antrim that day, because their score difference was vastly superior to Laois. So like Laois put everything into that game, got a great result, won it at the death. So like they're maybe looking at it now that it's been a similar trend so far in the championship. Been a very good performance the first day against Dublin, lost by 2 points, then 2 terrible results in the last couple of games, and now they're coming in 4th game. They've had a bit of a break. Like historically, okay, Galway have beaten them a fair bit, but I don't think they'd have the same hang-ups. At least the fact that Galway aren't traditional, they're not. Laois wouldn't have played them, traditionally or historically like they would have other teams like Wexford or Kilkenny. So maybe that same fear factor is in there. The Franny Ford factor as well. Franny was an unbelievable part of that Galway set up in 2017 and won the All-Ireland. Brilliant coach. We'll know a lot about the Galway lads. Maybe Laois would play on that. It might make, a lot of this stuff is overhyped and overplayed, but the Laois guys will maybe use that as they'll see that as being to their advantage. So, okay, obviously you expect Galway to win the game, but it might not be as straightforward as everybody expects it to be as well.
It's a general question, Christy. I can remember being in Port Laois today, that Laois the week after they had won the Joe McDonagh, when they beat Dublin in a really memorable preliminary quarter final at the time. But right now, it seems it's really hard at every level of the game to make the breakthrough, that Laois can get to a certain point, but then to really push on. That's the challenge that I think not just Laois, but other counties, and even if you go down through the other hurling competitions, it's a similar issue where maybe you might have a team who's gone from Division 2A and then they get to Division 1. They just can't deal with it. To get into the top tier, really tricky.
Yeah, great question, Cian. I think if you look at the history, go back over the last 30, 40 years, you'll see this so often. You'll write about it. Where a team will do well. We've been there with Antrim, Laois, Westmeath, Kerry, and a super people involved, great work being done. They'll get up to a certain level. I think I would say though that Laois definitely, in 2019 did more than just, get up to that level. They were at that level, brilliant performance, very, really impressive in the Joe McDonagh final. First of all, against, they were playing a Westmeath team who'd been in the final the previous year. Emphatic win that day. Went down to Portlaoise then against Dublin. Unbelievable performance. That was one of those days, Cian, that the Clare footballers were playing beforehand. That day I was at it. That was one of those days. You're just saying, you were so delighted to be at that match. It was brilliant. It was a beautiful day. Huge crowd. And I think early on in that game, I think the definitely vibe was in the ground. Yeah, hold on a second now. There's a shock on the cards here. There's a performance. These boys are producing a performance. And you could sense that the whole thing building. And then when Laois won, it was just incredible. I remember even, talking to a few Laois players after that, they had said that, that they had just thought about all the bad days, they were beaten by 40 point stuff. And I suppose one win, it's not that one win, eradicates or removes all those bad scars or those bad days, but it does kind of make it feel worthwhile. And then they went up against Tip, and okay, we're beaten by 8 or 9 points for finish, but it was a really, really honourable performance. Tip didn't have it all their own way. Very, very competitive. And then I suppose look at, the COVID scenario in 2020 didn't make it easy for a county like Laois that, need more games, need to build on that momentum, Cian. The whole thing was stopped in March. they're kind of back to square one. Like, it's harder for a county like that to maybe recover than it would be for a more established county, especially in the Liam McCarthy. So, you know, they go in then to last year, you know, same thing again, shipped a bad beating from Wexford. But, you know, we're very, very competitive against Waterford. Like I wasn't at that game. Well, I actually listened to the second half. You know, I think they got a goal with about maybe with time up to bring it back to a couple of points. Waterford kind of kicked on again, like, but, you know, it wasn't. And even from talking to a few of the Waterford lads after, like, that, you know, I think that when they look back on the season, and, you know, they had those 4 games in 21 days. You know, they played Laois, Galway, Tipperary, and they played Limerick. And the Laois game was definitely mentioned as being a factor in, like, you know, that kind of long haul journey for Waterford. Like, as in the Laois game took an awful lot more out of them than they maybe thought it did, and psychologically they had to go to the well as well that day. You know, it was one of the hottest days of the year. So, like, Laois are capable of that. Like, you saw it in Parnell Park. They went to Parnell Park. You know, took Dublin all their time to beat them. 2-point win. You know, they're just capable of you know, really hitting that level. I suppose the biggest factor, the biggest struggle for these counties, you know, we mentioned it about they get up to a certain level, is trying to kind of almost psychologically bridge that gap. Now, I think Laois are a little bit different in that they've been there. You know, their clubs have done well. Like, they're, you know, they were in Leinster Club Final back in December. Their minors are in the Leinster Final. You know, they've been competitive, very competitive under 20 this year. So, like, a lot of those players maybe have more exposure to playing at the elite level than maybe some of the other counties would have, even at club level. So, like, I don't think Laois would, you know, go into this game with the hang-ups that maybe another county would have. So, yeah, but to answer your question, Cian, like, that is the big conundrum, is, you know, trying to get that pack. You know, you have a pack of, it's 11 now, right? Where you have 6 in Leinster, 5 in Munster. Is to try and get that pack up to 13, 14, you know, where you've really, really competitive 14 teams. You're never going to have, you know, like, a situation where you have 14 teams at the same level. That's just not going to happen. You can't just manufacture that or you know, hope that that's going to happen, you know, in a short time span. And if you look at the history of this situation as well, it's a numbers game. A lot of the problem, I think, in the counties that are in that second tier, if you want to call it, you know, is that it's the club scenario as well, whereby, you know, you saw it there in you know, Brannigan's comments last week about the Kilcoo scenario, where sometimes, you know, like, I thought it was a bit degrading. You know, he spoke about the down players, you know, for a guy who'd never played inter-county football before. But sometimes, you know, there can be a tendency for, you know, if a club is going well and the club maybe has a realistic chance of, you know, obviously they're going to do well in their own county, maybe has a realistic chance of doing well in the province, that they maybe sometimes there's a tendency to look down on the county players, as in that, you know, we look at those boys that they're wasting their time. You know, we're here now, we're going to compete with the big guns at club level. And it's absolutely not comparable, because it's a totally different level. So, you know, you'd find that sometimes it's a scenario where there's something that happens in the county where there's maybe a brawl in a club match, and, you know, one of that club pulls out of the county squad, leaves kind of you know, bad taste, and then you're you know, managers coming in, then they're trying to remove that, or trying to heal those scars. You know, that never is really going to happen in one of the top counties. And if it does, if a club pulls out, there's always going to be other players they'll get to make up the squad. So, look, it's a numbers game, Cian. You look at the amount of clubs in Laois compared to the amount of clubs in Galway, for example. There's no comparison. Smaller county, obviously, as well, and it's a dual county. So, but that is the great conundrum. As hurling people, as genuine hurling people, that's the one thing we all want to see. Like, is we all want to see, you know, can we get that? Can we get that pack up? You know, can we build it up more? And I suppose, look, at the biggest positive for hurling people all over the country over the last week has been, you know, the results, the Leinster minor semi-finals last weekend, where you have Laois and Offaly in the Leinster final. And like we actually mentioned it here last week, that, you know, everybody knew around the country that Offaly had a good minor team this year, really good minor team. You know, Laois, you know, obviously a lot of good work has gone into that squad. they've laid out their stall, getting Derek McGrath involved. So now you have a scenario where you've the last 5 teams in the All-Ireland Minor Championship are Clare, Laois, Offaly, Galway, and Tipperary. So obviously Tip are probably favourites. Like, Galway are always going to be strong. Tip look very strong, but you have a Tipperary Clare Minor final tonight in the Gaelic Grounds going to. Really looking forward to it. That's a really good Clare Minor team. Were beaten by 40 points last year. Went down to Páirc Uí Rinn recently, turned over Cork, who were emphatic All-Ireland champions last year. So, it's not all about, I suppose the most satisfying thing from a Clare perspective is our results have not been good at underage over the last 5-6 years. But like we've spoken about this before, Cian, all you need is 1 or 2 guys off those squads. And that's the one thing Clare have been doing. They've been getting good players, Dermot Ryan, Aidan McCarthy, Shane Meehan, but Shane Meehan is still under 20. Mark Rogers, these guys that have played on underage teams that were well beaten, not once they're not competitive, but we're not really they weren't really a force at that level. As opposed to you look at a county like Galway, who we've spoken about this numerous times. Okay, could have been in a Leinster final under 20. We're narrowly beaten by Kilkenny. We're now in an All-Ireland final. But it's another year where Galway have gone, without winning under 20. So from a Laois perspective, it's probably more an Offaly perspective. Traditionally, if you have a good underage team, unlike the stronger counties, you're looking to really, really get a lot of players out of that squad. And that's what Laois and Offaly would be looking with these groups. There's no guarantees. But I think, if you look at even the tradition and the history of Offaly hurling, you look at the amount of players they got. They won 3 minors in 4 years between 86 and 89. And that was effectively the Offaly senior squad for like 15 years after us. You even look at, the Offaly got to minor final in 87 against Tipperary, won it with 4 guys under 16, Johnny Dooley, John Troy, I'm caught here now, I can't think of the other, Adrian Cal, and there was one other player, like Joe Early would have played in 86, he was a goalie, was centre back in 87. So you had like John Troy was the goalie in 87 and 89, and turned into one of the most talented outfield centre forwards of the last 20 years. So that's the thing, I suppose, when you get a good underage team, you really, really have to cash it in.
Christy, how, and I suppose it's a difficult question to answer, but how can some counties, and you could even translate this into club scenarios too in any county, but some clubs or counties can maximise and they can make the most out of, like Offaly did, let's say, with that, I suppose, 3-year spell that they had, or 3 or 4 year spell, and as you said, for a decade plus at senior intercounty level they can deliver. When then you look at Galway, for example, who were serially winning minors and yet don't seem to be able to translate it into the same success winning, but also getting players through more, which is probably a bigger issue.
Yeah. Just first of all, King, Brian Whelan was the 4th guy, right? Obviously, what planet was I on there? But you're not talking about like average players like Brian Whelan, Johnny Dooley, John Troy. Like these guys are, some of the greatest players of their generation. To move on to your next question, like we've mentioned this before, Cian, whereby, sometimes, and this is kind of a wider debate as well, whereby, like I was looking there at I was at the under 20 Munster final last week between Tip and Limerick. Brilliant game, brilliant occasion. But there was 2 players on that Limerick team who, didn't come through the academy. Like they just picked up maybe from the club scene and from guys that were, maybe that got their attention, which is absolutely brilliant to see. So it's not all about, you need to be on an underage squad or you need to be on a development squad. And I think at times there has been a lot of debate, right, where, like John Horn initiated this debate a few years ago, and there was a committee in place. Michael Dempsey headed it up. Brian Cutler was heavily involved. Whereby it's probably the current underage structure is probably a byproduct of a lot of that. The data that came out of that report, right? Where you have under 17 now. I still think they probably haven't got it right, Cian, because most kids now are doing the leaving at 19. Like most of them are doing transition year. So it's not really would say kids that are under 18 now are not really doing the leaving, so it's not as big a factor as it was. But to go back to that point about the development squads, like that, at times I think they can be, I'm not like, of course, development squads are massively important, hugely important, brilliant work done, great education, great values instilled, great coaching, all of that. But at times, they can go over, overboard. Like Brian Cupper told me a story one time where there was a guy from a young player. He was on a Donegal development squad. He might have been on a Donegal minor squad. I'm not 100% sure of, but he used to get on a bus after school, like 2 days a week, and he used to get to drive, or the bus used to go. He was maybe in the south of the county, or I can't remember, south or the north. He used to go on the bus. The bus journey would take 2 hours to do a collective gym session, and then he'd get 2 hours back. So he was getting back around 11 o'clock at night. So, and Cuthbert said to him, well, he says, when do you get time to do your homework? He says, I just don't do it. He said, I just take it attention the day after I come back from training. So, and he said, well, what do your parents think of that? He said, well, they don't really care. I'm on the Donegal minor squad. So, like, is that really healthy? Like, is that, what you really want out of your development squad, right? And okay, like the other side of this as well is, there's, I suppose, the fear amongst a lot of, people on the ground is that that if they devalue it a little bit more, that, you might take out the competitive element. And that's what really kids want. You see that at underage where, there is that, something with the Go games, you can completely see what they're about. But a lot of kids in at the same age are playing soccer. The soccer games are competitive. They kind of like that. So you have to have, there's a balance there. To go back to the Galway question, right? Have they got too much success? Has there been too much of a status around being an All-Ireland minor winner? Do they get caught up in the hype? We mentioned this before as well, Cian. The two biggest things for me with Galway, from struggling to moving on from minor to under 20, is that especially their forward play. Like, I think their forward play decreases. I think their skill level, is not at the same level. But I think a lot of that is built into the S&C factor, where, maybe the skill level at under 17 is more pronounced, where, the S&C is not able to kind of override that, if that makes sense. Whereas under 20, there's an awful lot more physicality, there's an awful lot more hits. That's not to say that doesn't happen at minor level. Of course it does. But maybe you get away with that a bit more at minor level. But like, really, for the best example I can give you is, if you look at the Galway squad now, okay, it's kind of really dominated by the 2015 minor team, right? Where you have Colm Gannon, Evan Nyland, Thomas Monaghan, Jack Fitzpatrick's on the squad, Fintan Burke. I think I'm missing somebody else, right? So, but which is great to see from a Galway perspective, like, but it's still, that's 7 years ago. Like, these guys now are 25, which in one sense is a good thing, that, they're at a good age now. But like, it's still taking them a long time, Cian, to kind of get on and establish themselves on the team. Like the lofty thing, I know I'm leaving out one player there as well, and I can't think of them, but so like, but maybe in one sense that's not a bad thing for Galway. Like, that these guys now, they haven't, like, if you look at go back to when Galway were winning All-Ireland minors in the 90s, and they were almost pouring these guys into a black hole. Like, the next blue chip talent off the minor squad, he'd come in, brilliant player, thrown in at 19. I won't mention names of, but I could list off a litany of these guys that were incredible underage players, were thrown in at senior level, were almost gobbled up, spat out, were never even heard of again. It kind of maybe psychologically impacted on them, even going forward as club players. Like, you go back, if you look at the some of those players Galway produced in those minor teams, 92, 93 lost a final, 94 won a brilliant final, and with players like Rory Gantley was on that team, was under 16. Go back in 96, they lost a semi-final to Cork in 95. They lost the final after replay tip in 96. Mark Kearns was on that team. Eugene Cloonan was on that team. Incredible players, but there was probably guys even on, and Galway had a history as well of, Matty Murphy had a great kind of, not a great, but a real tendency to spot young players. You had Shane Maloney played in the minor final when he was under 16. Obviously Canning played when he was only 15. Who else? Like Kevin Broderick played as a goalie when he was 16 and 93, still underage in 95. Like you saw Galway doing this that no other county used to do. Like, okay, you saw it with Owen Kelly and Tip. Fergal Healy played in 93 when he was under 16. Like Alan Kearns was the goalie in 94. Like one of the all-time great stats, Cian, from a Galway perspective. Alan Kearns played in the 94 All-Ireland minor final and never touched the ball once because he didn't puck out the ball. The full back, Peter Hoban, was taking the puck outs. So, and there was a guy that, went on to win an All-Ireland football medal, senior football medal, was an incredible player for Galway, played in the 05 final. So, you look at all those players that they were producing, like incredible players. But maybe back then it was a little bit easier to make that transition, that the skill level, the S&C culture, the game now compared to what it was back then is unrecognisable. Now you look at Limerick last Sunday, for example, like Sean Flynn had a brilliant piece there in 42 the other day, where he's looking at Limerick's tackle rate, he's looking at Tip's tackle rate, where obviously Tip worked harder, Tip made more tackles. But if you break it down, like the team that doesn't have the ball has to make more tackles. So if you break it down into what Limerick are doing, I think it was every time a Tip player has possession, they're making a tackle like 1.2, 1.3 possessions. So like that's the game now. Like that, if you want to win in Ireland, that's the world you have to go into, right? It's the world you have to be able to survive in. So that's maybe a world that Galway have, a lot of the Galway younger players have struggled to prosper in. Now you look at, we'll say Galway over the last 5 years, I suppose the one asset they've had and the one asset that they still have is they're a big, strong physical team. They're able to survive, prosper in that world, absolutely no issue. But maybe that's the reason, Cian, that it's taken some of the younger guys a bit longer to actually make that breakthrough, or not make that breakthrough, but actually get in and be comfortable to play and to survive at a level that you need to in the game, in the world that now exists and in the world that is now dominated by Limerick, let's be honest.
Sorry, Christy, I suppose just we move a little bit away from it just before we wrap up. From my own point of view, being a Mayo man, I've been keeping obviously an eye on the Mayo hurlers. They're in a Christy Ring Cup basically semi-final against Derry at the weekend. They're playing in McHale Park after winning 3 games on a row against Wicklow, London and Sligo. They had a very poor league campaign, but this has come on the back of a Nicky Rackard win last year. I mean, in the final year before, like it does kind of show the progress that the Mayo are making.
Absolutely, Colm. Like and like even to win a Nicky Rackard now and to try and get up into a Christy Ring final. Obviously, Kildare, obviously the team to beat in that competition, right? They have a lot of hardened experience, but look at there's you saw it with Turin, you saw it with Ballyhonus, right? That these like we'll say the Mayo club have never won an All Ireland, or sorry, never won a Connacht's intermediate title. That mold was broken in 2017. It's been broken 2 or 3 times since. Like I suppose for Turin, they were just unlucky to come up against a good team back in the All-Ireland semi-final. But like stuff like that, we mentioned it earlier on, Colm, whereby the club factor can really feed into the dynamic of the county team if that is embraced, right? And I suppose that's probably easier for it to happen in maybe counties that don't have as many clubs. Now the other side of that is I know there's probably a few the Turin lads that are not playing now because they've had a couple of long seasons, but like they've proven like that they can compete. They've beaten Galway teams like and Galway teams that are some of those teams were Galway senior teams that have come down, had gone back up, were expected, would be playing at a good level, and they've been turned over. So, and I suppose the big thing as well, Colm, they've got a few recruits as well, and to mention like Joe Mooney, who's playing with Mayo, like a guy that would have been on the Galway squad in 18, and who would have actually that Wild Geese exhibition game out in Australia at the end of 18, when Galway beat Kilkenny in a free taking competition, but Joe Mooney actually got the goal in the last second to take that game into a shootout. So like you look at the experience he has, and that what he can bring to Mayo, and then obviously you look at Keith Higgins, like and I think genuinely, Colm, I think a lot of people wouldn't have seen Keith Higgins hurl, right? But I think there's an acceptance there that he's a special talent, right? That he is, you know, like a guy that, you know, when Matty Murphy was over I remember speaking to Matty Murphy when he was the Mayo hurling manager back in 2002, and he was telling me about this young lad, this 16, 17-year-old young Higgins that was going to be, you know, a serious player. And that was the first I'd heard of him. And then, you know, he was on the squad maybe a few months later. Keith has a Railway Cup medal, hasn't he?
He does, yeah.
So, you know, one of the few players like Conall Keaney that has a Railway Cup medal in hurling and football, which is a fair achievement in the last, you know, 10, 15 years. So you look at like you've had one of the most successful, one of the most decorated, I think after Lee Keegan and along with Colin Boyle, he's the most decorated Mayo player in terms of All-Stars. So you look at what he can bring to a dressing room, the experience he can impart, the knowledge he can impart, you know, class hurler. So like having a guy like him as well, I think does give you an X factor when you're going into a big game like this, because, you know, inspirational player and an incredible leader.
Yeah, even the last day when it was going against him, he went up full forward and got a goal and turned around and got the second goal. Then that kind of set them off in the way. And just, you know, it's been great to have him there. Even going back to when he was a young player, before he was even probably known as footballer, I can remember him playing, I think it might have been 2004 in an All-Ireland B final in Croke Park against Kildare as an 18-year-old. Like, he was that kind of guy marked out. But yeah, he said like that, and Joe Mooney and has been a great bonus. They also had McManus's Jar and Joe from St. Jude's. They'd played with Mayo when they won the Rackard in 16. They're back this year. And Shane Boland from Toreen is taking the frees and doing really well. And Stephen Coyne, like, you know, it's a big test for Mayo on Sunday against Derry. You know, if they can get over, it'd be great. We've got 3 years in a row in Croke Park and All-Ireland finals for them. But it's Kildare are the standard bearer of that competition. But it's good for them after having a very poor league campaign. Derek Walsh, we spoke to him after the game the last day, was saying, you know, now things could have easily fallen apart, but they were able to rally together and get it back up for the championship run.
And I think one thing as well, Colin, right, that, you know, we all saw like the massive and, you know, unbelievable you know, energy that was behind the Hurling for Hope you know, foundation. And like, you know, I would have watched a lot of that stuff online, and like the absolutely outpouring of respect and love for Keith Higgins and his brother Pierce, you know, another massive hurling man. And like, you know, their dad Pete, like unbelievable hurling people, like, right. So, you know, I think there's probably that element as well behind, you know, the Keith. I think Keith brings so much, right? He's so loved in Mayo. He's so kind of cherished, and, you know, I suppose the fact that, you know, Pete or Pierce is going through such a difficult time, you know, with motor neuron disease. And I think that, you know, maybe that something like that as well, you know, like even, you know, that Keith would have said like that, okay, their biggest rivals are Toreen, you know, massive rivalry there, but, you know, they've probably backed them, and they've probably, you know, they've shown them more support than anyone else. And that just goes to show you, I suppose, the hurling community and how together it is. And you'd be hoping as well that they can, maybe Mayo can, you know, tap into some of that goodwill that's been there for Keith Higgins and his family.
Christy, thanks very much. Our time just about thrown out. We'll chat to you soon.